On our newscast tonight, following through with promises is difficult but important, especially when you're at the nation's top office. After announcing plans to scale down a pension plan due to a revenue shortfall, President Park apologizes for failing to make good on one of her key campaign pledges. On charges of conspiring to stage a revolution and praising North Korea and its ideology, minor opposition Unified Progressive Party lawmaker Lee Seok-ki is indicted. His party argues the earlier than expected move was politically motivated. Finally, the U.S. Senate has agreed to stop arguing and start considering legislation to raise the debt ceiling for 2014. But another battle over Obamacare could complicate matters. For these and other stories, stay tuned.
It is 5 a.m. in Washington, 12:30 in the afternoon in Tehran, and 6 on a Thursday evening here in Seoul. Welcome to Early Edition at 6. I'm Moon Gon-young.
And I'm Daniel Cha. Thank you for tuning in. We begin with fresh controversy surrounding Budget 2014.
Right, the Park Geun-hye administration has drawn up its first budget draft since taking office, and the figure stands at some $333 billion. The
Korean leader boosted welfare spending to a record high, earmarking nearly 30% of the entire budget. Our Han-dan breaks down the numbers for us.
Numbers have been crunched and the funds have been divided. Now all that remains to be seen is how Parliament and the people react to the Park Geun-hye administration's first national budget draft. The government says it plans to spend a total of 357.7 trillion won, or roughly $333 billion next year, which is a 4.6% increase from this year's spending. The key word in next year's proposal is welfare, in line with a series of welfare pledges made by the president. More than $98 billion, or nearly 30% of the total, is to be put aside for the welfare and health sector. This is the largest budget allocation for health and welfare in the nation's history. Finance Minister Lee Seok-ki, however, explained that some necessary welfare benefits had to be scaled back a little, as revamping the sluggish economy remains the government's top priority. The draft was drawn up under the premise that the economy will grow by 3.9% next year, which is slightly lower than the government's previous outlook. Looking into other sectors, the largest allocation following welfare was roughly $54 billion for general and local administration, some $47 billion for education, and more than $33 billion for national defense. About $21 billion is put aside for social overhead capital, or SOC, while more than $17 billion will be sliced up for agriculture, fisheries, and food. The draft was endorsed during a cabinet meeting presided over by President Park on Thursday and will be submitted to Parliament by next Wednesday. Han-dan, Arirang News.
And President Park Geun-hye has apologized for failing to follow through on one of her key campaign pledges.
She did, however, vow to fulfill her promise before her time at the Blue House comes to an end. Our presidential office correspondent, Jin-ju, reports.
President Park has apologized for not being able to keep her campaign pledge of making sure all senior citizens aged 65 and older receive a basic pension of $186 a month. However, she also said she wasn't abandoning her promise altogether.
그동안 저를 믿고 신뢰해 주신 어르신들 모두에게 지급하지 못하는 결과가 생겨서 죄송한 마음입니다. 하지만 이것이 결코 공약의 포기는 아닙니다. 국민과의 약속인 공약은 지켜야 한다는 저의 신념은 변함이 없습니다.
President Park, in her comments at Thursday's cabinet meeting, acknowledged that the pension pledge would remain unfulfilled for now, but she said she would make sure it was realized within her term in office.
비록 지금은 어려운 재정 여건 때문에 약속한 내용과 일정대로 실행에 옮기지 못하는 부분들도 임기 내에 반드시 실천하기 위해 최선을 다할 것입니다.
She stressed that her hands were tied at the moment, considering the tax revenue shortfall, the negative impact her original plan could have on the nation's fiscal soundness, and the financial burden it would impose on future generations. It would have taken as much as $145 billion in government spending by the year 2040 to meet the original pledge's financial requirements. President Park said the government was putting priority on economic revitalization and job creation in its budget, especially at a time when it is having a hard time raising tax revenue. The presidential office of Cheongwade explained President Park's comments were sincere and aimed at seeking understanding from the public. However, with the opposition party defining her remarks as an annulment of her pledge, her scaled-down welfare plan will almost certainly remain an issue of dispute. Oh Jin-ju, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, Korea's ruling Saenuri Party and the main opposition Democratic Party are going toe-to-toe over the government's welfare policy. The ruling party called for an emergency meeting of its lawmakers earlier today to discuss two important pending issues: next year's budget and the scaled-back pension for senior citizens.
The ruling party said it was regrettable but understandable considering the difficult fiscal conditions facing the nation. The Democratic Party held a large rally in front of the parliament's main hall, condemning the Park administration for retreating on its welfare pledges. Accusing the government of lying to the people, opposition lawmakers and senior citizens at the rally demanded the president keep her promises.
So President Park Geun-hye, who took office 7 months ago with great expectations surrounding her, is seeing her electoral honeymoon collapse around her as she rolls back the big welfare pledges that helped her take power.
The Korean leader is scaling down pension payouts for the elderly and delayed planned college tuition subsidies by 1 year until 2015 due to a revenue shortfall. Flagship pledges that won her support from young and old voters during the presidential elections last year.
Joining us live in the studio for a discussion on the government's pension plan and its implications is Yoo Jae-ik, senior researcher of the Economic Engineering Committee at the Future Politics Economic Institute.
Thank you for joining us today.
All right, so Dr. Yoo, the details of the Park Geun-hye administration's basic pension program have been unveiled, and as widely expected, the Korean leader was forced to scale back aid that she had pledged to pensioners in 2014. Now, what is the general public's response to the revised plan?
Generally, the presidential campaign promise for basic pension for elderly is actually unconditional allowance of 200,000 won. But it is very difficult to raise this fund by 2017 for 5 years of her presidency. But it turned out to be unrealistic basic pension system because of the economic expression and the decrease of the national tax revenue, and also increasing old aging people by 2017. Wow. The people think about the President Park has to examine the revision of the welfare and also apologize of his change or her change of the welfare plan to the people. But recently, the unconditional months allowance for 65 over aged people are just political verbal agenda and promise, but it's not for the real world of the situations. In addition, financial subsidiary for 4 severe diseases are also taken into consideration, but detail of treatment are not prepared.
Okay, now we are anticipating considerable political repercussion for President Park. Now let's turn to the responses from both the ruling and main opposition parties. How do you expect the issue to play out in the nation's political circles?
As a matter of fact, improvement of the population health and well-being are usually requiring for enormous challenge of a huge investment. Improving welfare service without increasing tax revenue must be unrealistic in most of the nations in OECD. The Democratic Party clearly expressed the negative aspect of the linkage and the connection between basic pension and the national pension system. Because the national pension system is basically safeguard for the poor senior safety systems. Meanwhile, we have to investigate the circumstance and condition of the welfare system before making decision of the increasing tax revenue. This means that the government should make a great effort to examine the situation of the leakage of the welfare fund and to check the efficiency and the effectiveness of welfare investment compared with the population social and health service satisfaction.
So basically the main reason behind reversing the pledge lies in the nation's economic and fiscal soundness. Of course, Korea is grappling with a slowing business investment and rising household as well as sovereign debt and dwindling tax revenues. Some are saying that levying more tax on perhaps the nation's wealthiest is the only way to realize President Park Geun-hye's pledges. Is this a possibility?
Well, the President Park still keep a foregoing presidential campaign and strategy not to impose tax that reach the class. However, opposition party want to raise the tax for the rich to maintain the quality of the well-being and basic pension systems. So I think that what is the best solution to negotiate between two different parties is that we will mobilize another aspect of the participation from the private company or other sector industries.
Okay, we're going to move on to the final question we have for you because we are short of time, Dr. Yu. Now, there is criticism that the government is not addressing the welfare issue in an efficient manner. The welfare-related policies are adopted and carried out not just by the nation's health and welfare ministries, but by other ministries as well. Now, it appears to me that there needs to be a government-wide control tower managing the country's welfare policies and spendings. So, in your opinion, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, currently, the Park government spend about $100 billion for national welfare system. But some part of this budget must be used for the improvement of the welfare infrastructure system, because while we spend a lot of the money, but the condition of the living quality still unveiled. How to cope with this unveiled information for marginalized people and society? So this is why we need reshape of the welfare information infrastructure and the facilities.
Okay, Dr. Lee Seok-ki, Senior Researcher of the Economic Engineering Committee at the Future Politics Economic Institute, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to having you again someday.
Thank you so much.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with heroes and experts to help you understand the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best. with Moon Gun-young and Daniel Che on Early Edition at 6.
Now shifting gears to the economy, Korean import prices rose by 2 points. South Korea's top diplomat says North Korea must regain the trust it squandered from the international community before returning to the negotiating table. South Korea's Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se, who is in New York to attend the UN General Assembly, said Wednesday local time that Pyongyang cannot be trusted considering its history of breaking promises. Now, Yoon reiterated that talks will happen only when North Korea shows sincerity towards its previous commitments towards denuclearization, adding that the ball is now in North Korea's court. The South Korean diplomat said that while Seoul and Washington are keeping the door to dialogue open, they will no longer agree to holding meaningless talks. A Korean F-5 fighter jet crashed into a mountain in the central part of the country today, but the pilot managed to escape safely right before the plane went down. The one-seater plane was on its way to a military base in Cheongju to participate in a biannual training exercise. Now, the 32-year-old pilot who ejected from the aircraft has been transferred to a military hospital for treatment. The crash is the latest in a string involving different variants of the F-5 fighter jet. A total of 3 F-5s crashed in Korea's eastern Gangwon province in 2010, killing 5 pilots.
Moving on to other stories, the prosecution has indicted leftist lawmaker Lee Seok-ki of the Unified Progressive Party on charges of conspiring and inciting an armed rebellion with a clandestine group that sympathizes with North Korea. Kim Hyun-ji reports.
Leftist lawmaker Lee Seok-ki has been indicted on charges of conspiring a revolt and praising North Korea and its ideology. The minor opposition Unified Progressive Party lawmaker is the first sitting legislator in Korean history to be arrested. The trial, the country's first for sedition in nearly 30 years, is expected to take place soon. The Suwon District Prosecutor's Office announced Thursday that Lee plotted to stage an armed rebellion during a meeting with his underground organization dubbed the RO, or Revolutionary Organization, in May. According to the prosecution, Lee made very specific plans to attack a number of public facilities with RO members, based on the assumption that an inter-Korean war would break out soon. The prosecution says it has obtained 604 pieces of evidence that can prove Lee's conspiracy, as well as the RO's outright praise of North Korea and its ideology of self-reliance, called juche. In South Korea, praising North Korea constitutes a breach of the national security law, while sedition is a criminal offense separate from this law. The national security law was enacted in 1948 to fight communism and North Korean espionage, after the two Koreas were divided in 1945 and as war was brewing between them. The law has been amended several times since then, but opponents say it is often used to silence critics. The prosecution's indictment of Lee came about a week earlier than widely expected. The Unified Progressive Party said Thursday that the early announcement was scheduled to coincide with President Park's announcement that the government will have to scale back its original welfare pledges. Prosecutors have also indicted 3 other leftist political activists on similar charges. Kim Hyun-ji, Arirang News.
Starting today, banks here in Korea will require an extra step from customers who want to use internet banking for money transfers. Users will now have to respond to a text or phone call to confirm their actions made online, all in response to a rise in online financial fraud here in the nation. Our Connie Lee has more.
Transferring money via the internet now takes an extra step for those in Korea. Starting Wednesday, when transferring more than 3 million won, or more than $2,800 online, customers will have to verify their actions by answering a text message or a phone call. Previously, users could just input their password and a security certificate code given by the banks to confirm their transfer, but now they'll have to confirm the transaction via phone or text. The system was put in place in an effort to reduce the growing amount of financial fraud online.
Recently, farming or online scams have been on the rise. So with this extra step, we hope that the number of financial fraud cases will start to decrease.
The number of farming cases has been on the rise as of late. Between the months of January and July, there were more than 1,200 cases, with more than $4 million in losses. This new system, however, won't apply to all foreigners living in Korea.
This new system was created for Korean nationals. Foreigners residing in Korea should check with their banks to see if it applies to them.
For instance, foreigners with Citibank will be subject to the system, while those with Korean Exchange Bank will still be able to make large transfers using their security certificate numbers. Banks are now asking customers to double-check that their phone numbers registered with the banks are indeed correct and up to date. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Well, already struggling to avert a government shutdown that could begin next week, the U.S. Congress turned its attention on Wednesday to the fight over raising the debt ceiling. Arirang News' Kim Ji-yeon has this report.
The U.S. Senate has agreed to stop debating and start considering congressional legislation to raise the debt limit for 2014 and avert a shutdown of the federal government that could begin as early as October 1st. The fight is complicated by another battle over President Barack Obama's signature health care law, the so-called Obamacare. Republicans want to end funding for the program, which is part of the government funding bill, and Democrats are fighting against that effort. Republican Senator Ted Cruz argued against the controversial law on Tuesday in a 21-hour, 19-minute talk marathon to defund Obamacare.
Whether or not Obamacare is helping the American people, Mr. President, if you focus on the substance, the evidence is overwhelming. This law is a train wreck.
Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid called Cruz's effort a big waste of time and said it was a political tactic to delay passage of the legislation to keep the government running. Treasury Secretary Jack Lew had earlier pleaded for swift action in Congress on raising the $16.7 trillion limit on government borrowing. Lew warned that the government could default on its debt as early as October 17th, when only $30 billion will remain in his agency's checking account. Meanwhile, a New York Times CBS News poll released on Wednesday showed that American patience for the fight is running out. 80% of respondents said it would be unacceptable for lawmakers to threaten government agency shutdowns during budget negotiations to achieve their goals. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Iranian President Hassan Rouhani says he wants nuclear talks with the West on his country's nuclear development program in the next 3 to 6 months. In interviews with the U.S. media outlets on Wednesday following his speech at the UN General Assembly, Rouhani criticized international sanctions on his country, saying that Iran poses absolutely no threat to the world. He also reiterated that his country's nuclear program is solely for peaceful purposes only. President Rouhani urged Western countries to seek a diplomatic solution to their differences and added that he has the full support of Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei to handle nuclear negotiations.
And now the weather with our Michelle Park. Michelle, it's officially autumn now, I think, judging by how cool it is.
It was, so if you're stuck inside an office right now, do yourself a favor and sneak out for a little fresh air. It's really beautiful outside.
And we're expecting even more nice weather tomorrow, right?
That's right. We have high pressure in the atmosphere, which often leads to beautiful days, although there is light rain in the east coastal region, which will come to an end tonight. At the same time, we should keep in mind that our morning and night temperatures are still dropping, so make sure you have a light sweater or even a jacket with you to stay warm. Taking a closer look at the forecast, most of our daytime temperatures are now in the low to mid 20s, so we'll start off the morning at 11 and reach up to 25 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will peak at 26 and 24 degrees respectively. Down onto Jeju Island, there are lots of clouds tomorrow. Dokdo should peak at 20 and Mount Kumgang should stay at 15. Well, that's all I have for you tonight. I'm Michelle Park and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you for that, Michelle. And that's all from us for this hour. Thank you for watching. This has been Daniel Chen.
And I'm Moon Gon-young. Thank you as always for being here with us. Enjoy the rest of your evening and we'll see you right back here, same time tomorrow. Good night.